Hello everyone and thank you much for watching. This is me, Mr. P, and this is another episode in the Proxmox home server series. In this video, I'll show you how I converted my network boot Raspberry Pi to act as a VDI client, basically a thin client, to access VMs inside the Proxmox. So let's begin. For this to work, I'm gonna use the GitHub script created by Josh, and he's detailed exactly everything what you need to do. I'm gonna do slightly different what he is mentioning in this GitHub repository. Basically, the way that once you get all this done is going to be a manually initiated VDI client, where I will show you how you can get that automated, which means every time when the Raspberry Pi starts or network boots from a Proxmox, you will get the login screen or login prompt to log in with the username and a password to access the particular VM. So first thing what we need to do for this to work is obviously get VMs created that will be accessed using this VDI client. For this tutorial, I'm going to use two VMs. One is going to be Linux, Pop! OS, and another one is going to be Windows, or more specific is Windows 11. So by the way, this is my main Proxmox, so I'm going to use this as on my main Proxmox server. I'm not going to use inside my Proxmox sandbox, which I usually use when I'm doing this kind of tutorials. So 102, the VM 102 is my Pop! OS-VDI, and this is basically a basic Pop! OS VM created, nothing fancy, except a couple of things that I had to change for this to work, for this VM to actually work using VDI. So first thing, under display, from default, I chose to be Spice, and we're going to use a Spice protocol to connect to. The Spice is basically, there is a configuration file that if you go, for example, into this VM, and under here, as you can see, if I click Spice, it's going to automatically download the file. But right now it doesn't because the file is closed, but you download the file and then you can use any remote access programs that can read Spice files, and then it can automatically log in, etc. So, right, summary, Pop! OS VDI. So this is what I'm going to use. I'm going to use Spice. On Linux, you don't need to specify Spice dual monitor, 3 or 4 monitors. On Windows, you will have to specify how many monitors you connect. Raspberry Pi 4 has 2 display outputs, or 2 mini HDMI outputs. So if you select 2 displays and you want to use with Windows, you obviously need to select Spice dual monitor. On Linux, it automatically will detect how many monitors you have connected to your thin client. It's just going to work straight away, automatic. I'm just checking if my mic is on. And 16 megabytes memory display is fine. Next thing, there is USB devices, Spice USB devices added. As the Raspberry Pi 4 has 4 USB ports, 2 3.0 and 2 2.0 ports. I added all these ports here. That means I can pass through up to 4 devices into that VM. So let's say one is going to be keyboard, one is going to be mouse, maybe something else, let's say a card reader or whatever. To add the USB Spice, you click on add, you select USB device, and then just leave the bubble next to Spice port. You click add, and right now, as you can see, there is a 5th one showed up. I'm just going to remove that because Raspberry Pi only have 4 USB ports. And pretty much that's it. On the Windows side, this is the Windows VM, Windows 11 VDI. Again, similar configuration under display. I left this in Spice, and Raspberry Pi, I have only 1 display connected, so I'm not going to choose 2, 3, or 4. So 1. And next thing, obviously, as you can see here, is USB stuff is happening as well. So we have 1, 2, 3, and 4. And another thing that is quite important, under options, use table for pointer is off. If you notice that your VDI client, or when you're using remote or thin client connection to the Windows machine and the mouse pointer acts a bit wonky, there's a big chance that use tablet for pointer is actually turned on your system. So you make sure that that's off. For that to properly work, you need to install additional drivers, which I'm not gonna actually go into this video. So you just select that as off or no, and that's gonna be fine. So 102 is the Pop! OS, and 113 is my Windows. Next thing what you need to do, you need to go into the data center, click on the users, and you need to create users. I have created 2 users. One is Mr. P and another one is Win. Mr. P has access to Pop! OS and Win has access to Windows. To create a user is quite simple. You click add, then give it a name. Let's say it's going to be test123. Make sure realm is changed from Linux to ProxVE. That means that it's not Linux like Linux core or Linux kernel, all underlying basic CLI will manage the connections. the Proxmox will manage the connections. That means that it doesn't have the full access to the system, to the Proxmox system, as you would normally have via Linux. So let's choose that as a Proxmox, give it a password, and obviously it needs to be same password, and that's it. You click save, and username or users created. Once you have user created or users created, you click on the actual VM that you want to give access to. And as you can see, I clicked the 102, which is Pop OS. I click permissions, click add a user, select that, let's say Mr. P again, and then no access, change that to PVE-VM user. That user will have access to utilize the VM without all the admin access to change the, let's say, amount of RAM this VM has or CPU or anything else. It's a user that just uses the VM, can start the VM, shut down the VM, restart the VM, and pretty much that's it. So that's how you add the users into this. So once you have all this sorted, let's go right now into Raspberry Pi and get the Raspberry Pi going. So I'm going to open the SSH client here, and I will SSH into my Raspberry Pi. So PXC Pi free, this is one of the free Raspberry Pis I have under PXCboot. So I'm going to use the third one, which is actually connected next to me, to a capture card, which is outputs the display, outputs into a separate display. So I'm logged in into Raspberry Pi. Step one is obviously go and let's start getting the sorted. Let's get sorted basically on this. So sudo apt update, and then sudo apt upgrade-y, and press enter. So this is just going to update and upgrade the repository and packages and everything else. By the way, all the commands I'm using in this tutorial you'll find in the description below in the chronological order that you need to follow. So while this is going, I'm just going to copy another command, which is quite lengthy. So I'm just going to copy that and then paste in. And what this will do is going to install xserver-xorg, lxde-core, and lxappearances. We're going to use the lxde desktop environment because this is Linux, this is Raspberry Pi OS with just CLI, no desktop GUI. So we need to have some sort of GUI installed and activated for VDI client to actually show up on the screen, because it can't just show up in a terminal. So we need to have some sort of a desktop GUI to allow us to show VDI client interface. So that's why we're going to install all these three here to make the LXD desktop GUI work. Python 3 pip, we need that to install a couple of packages from a pip repository. Python TK is a package that allows Python to manipulate with the, let's say, like desktop, the graphical end of the code. Virt-viewer is a program that will read the spice file that will be retrieved from the Proxmox using API. And Git is obviously to git clone the repository that we're going to use. So this, by the way, will take some time to install. So while it's installing, you have plenty of time to go and make yourself a cup of tea or coffee, or subscribe to my channel, or even watch another video of mine. By the time this is finished, obviously we'll be able to get everything going. So this, from my testing, takes about 10 to 15 minutes, depending on internet speed and all the other factors. So I would say at least 10 plus minutes will be spent installing all this. So I'll be back when all this is installed. After LXD installation, which actually feels like it was happening for eternity, we are ready to continue setting up the VDI client. So we have a Python 3 pip install, so we can install a couple of more things. So pip install, and what we need is a proxmoxer. Proxmoxer, I think, is going to nag that I need sudo. Probably not. Oh, I forgot to add the pip3. So pip3 install proxmoxer. Let's wait for that to get installed. Here we go. Next one, what we need to install is pip3 install PySimpleGUI. That obviously allows the VDI client to display properly. That's why we needed Python 3 TK installation. And next one is pip3 install requests, and that is to allow Python to initiate the API connection to your Proxmox server to retrieve the things. As you can see, looking already at satisfy requests, and everything is being sorted. So pip3 stuff is installed. So right now we can go and start getting the VDI client sorted. If we go here, this is the repository what we're going to use, like I mentioned. So we go into the terminal. I'm going to copy the link, which by the way you will find in description below. So what we're going to do is just copy that. Give me a second. Here we go. copy that and paste. So we git clone the PVE-VDI Client repository. So once that's cloned, we're going to have a folder created here. And inside this folder, we're going to have all the files that we need to make this work. First thing, straight away, I suggest to create or make the VDI client.py as executable. So sudo chmod plus space plus lowercase x vdiclient.py. Because some of the things in the future you're going to have to use that, and if you forget to chmod into the executable, it's going to be a bit of a pain to troubleshoot exactly why it doesn't work. So once that is done, what we need to do next is we create a file here. We're going to call it touch and Thinclient. Should I call Thinclient or PyClient? PyClient. Let's name it PyClient. Obviously, we need to sudo that. So right now we have this file which is going to say PyClient, and we're going to use that file in the future to make the automated VDI run. So we have the desktop installed and everything's fine. Let's test if it's all correct. To do that, sudo raspi-config. Under system options, we select enter that, and then there is an option S5. You enter on that, and then B4. You press that, and that will make all the changes automatically to make the load into a desktop instead of a terminal, and then obviously auto login with the user. In my case, username is Mr. P and the password is super easy password. So finish and then reboot. And like I said, I have a Raspberry Pi 4 here connected next to me, which goes to a capture card and on a separate display. So right now, hopefully, I will see a Raspberry Pi GUI starting up. So right now, I'm just going to wait for Raspberry Pi to restart. And hopefully, like I said, I will see a desktop. And here we are. I can see a Debian name here. And this is lxde showing up inside my Raspberry Pi 4, which is, by the way, is a network boot from my Proxmox. And by the way, too, if you don't know what I'm talking about, there is I already done a video how to make Raspberry Pi network boot from your Proxmox instance. So I'll leave the link to that video in the description below. So that's it. Okay, so I do have access to this. I think this is a terminal. No, this is the files. I don't really use this, so I don't really know. Let's go into a system, NLX terminal. Here we go. So this is Raspberry Pi. All well and good. So let's go back to the SSH client. So let's say that's it. If you are happy to initiate VDI client from LXD desktop, there's a couple of things you need to do. Let's log in back into Raspberry Pi on my main SSH terminal, and let's navigate to this folder where we have vdiclient.py. So we need to copy that into a user bin folder to make that as executable and accessible from anywhere inside the terminal. Doesn't matter which folder you are in. So sudo cp vdiclient.py, and we're going to move that into a USR, so stands for user, local bin, and enter. So once that in, let's go back to my LXD display, and I will type VDI client-py, press enter, and I should see the error message, which is great. That means the VDI client is starting, but the configurations is missing. That's what we're going to do now. Let's go back to main SSH client, and there is a file, as you can see here, VDI client ini example. So first thing, what we're going to do, we're going to say copy VDI client. Copy VDI client ini example to VDI client ini, and obviously we need to do sudo. So now I should have the file which is called VDI init, and this is the file that VDI client created by Josh will look for to make all the configurations work. First, we need to amend that or change a couple of things inside this file. So sudo nano VDI client.ini, and first thing what we're going to change is from VDI client, we're going to name this, you put whatever name you want. It's actually Galaxy, so I'm going to name this Galaxy because my home server name is Galaxy. And next thing, under kiosk, from false, I'll make this true. And that means that the VDI will run in a kiosk mode. That means that user can interact with anything else except VDI client. That's okay. Full screen doesn't matter because it says not applicable in kiosk mode. Let's go down to the list, and we're going to end up at the host where it says 10.10.10.100 and then PVE1. We're just going to comment that out and enter the IP address of your Proxmox. space equals 8006. So Proxmox, as you know, PySimpleGUI or desktop environment loads, or browser environment loads under 8006 port. And this is what we're going to do. And the ID number. And this one where it says here, I'm just going to comment that out. That's it. Nothing else. That's it. So you just change the title, whatever title you want. You obviously can go and change the theme, the icons, etc. I'm just changing just enough for this to work. So Galaxy, kiosk is true, and obviously add 192.168.178.123, my Proxmox instance. So Control X to close, Y to write, Enter to confirm, and the file is being amended. To double check, I can write cat or cat VDI Client ini, and I can see that there is my IP address showing up here, and I do have the name somewhere supposed to be showing up. Some at the top. Here we go, Galaxy. So everything is okie dokie. Next thing, we need to move this file into one of the 3 locations that this VDI client program will check for. The one that we're going to use in this video is inside ECT folder. So first we need to create this folder inside ECT. So sudo mkdir /etc/VDI client. I think I'm spelling correctly. VDI client. Here we go. That's done. And now sudo move VDI client ini file into ECT VDI client. That's it. So this file is inside there. So now if I'm go back into my LXD screen, and if I'm gonna bring back the same program name, as you can see, it shows up. So username is gonna be Mr. P, and a password, whatever password I created for this particular Proxmox user. Click load. And now, as you can see, this user has access to Pop! OS VDI. I'm click connect. And what's happening in the background is this VM, by the way, is off. So VDI client via the via API connection using a Proxmox request sends a message to the Proxmox server, which is there. And it just says, hold on, this user wants to access Pop! OS. I do make sure this VM starts and it wants to access it. So right now what you see is actually Pop! OS login screen. So I'm just going to log in, and I'm accessing Pop! OS VM from Raspberry Pi Thinclient. And if I click on this, so do I have NeoFetch here? NeoFetch. Here we go. As you can see, this is a Pop! OS 2204. It runs on KVM and etc. All this 2 gigabytes RAM. So this is Pop! OS. I'm accessing Pop! OS VM from the Thinclient, Raspberry Pi Thinclient. So next thing, once I get all this done, I click on the top here, click on this, and say power off. And right now, VM will be powered off, and same time VDI client will stop the connection to this VM. So I'm going to click log out. Now we can go and you log in as a different user, which is Vin. Click on that. So Windows 11 VDI. So click connect. So right now again, VDI client sends a signal to my Proxmox server saying, hold on, there is a user who wants to access this VM. So make sure it's up and running. So it's just Proxmox starts the VM for me. As you can see here, this is a Windows VM. One thing about this Windows VM, there's a bunch of things that I preset up for my, this VM is basically the copy of my main virtual machine that I'm using for work. So I'm not going to log in because I don't want to start showing all the stuff for my work. So instead, I'm just going to click on here and go straight away into a shutdown process. But basically, again, I enter the PIN number and log into Windows VM. I can manipulate how much as I want, and then just shut down, and it's going to disconnect from this connection, and I will be back into a VDI client login page. So while this is happening, great, I can access this stuff. But what if I want to make that to be automated? Or what I mean is like Raspberry Pi starts and I get VDI client login screen straight away without giving user access to the rest of the LXD system or Raspberry Pi system. That's what we're going to do right now, creating the startup script. So back on the main SSH terminal, what I need to do is I need to go into the home directory. And in here, as you can see, there is just a desktop, nothing else. There is a files hidden here, a folders. And the folder that we're looking for is config. This folder will be automatically created once you install LXDE desktop environment and do an initial restart. If you can't see this, it means that LXD desktop hasn't properly installed or you haven't restarted your Raspberry Pi. So we navigate into this folder, so .config. Dot in front of the folder or file makes the file or folder hidden. So in here, I should find a folder called lxsession. So cd inside lxsession. Inside here, you should see a name of your desktop environment. In my case, it's lxde. So cd into lxde. And now there is a file called Autostart. So sudo nano Autostart. And this is the 3 lines that initiates the basically all lxde desktop environment. So boot up screen, login screen, and obviously the screensaver. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to uncomment all these out, and I'm just going to click add. And now I need to enter here /usr/bin/bash. And now I need to point to the script that we created a couple of minutes ago, which I named it PyClient. So this is what I'm going to go. So home, Mr. P. I'm going to call it PyClient. So this is going to be the file that the bash needs to initiate. Control X to close, Y to write, Enter to confirm. Let's go back in a home screen in the home folder. So I'm inside the home Mr. P. Go inside this, and I think this is where I left this file. So I'm just going to move this file out of this place because it's the wrong location where I saved it. So it's just going to go into my home. Yeah, let's go home Mr. P. That's it. So just make sure that this is correct. This is where it needs to go. I'm just quickly going to double check the startup lxsession, lxde, auto start. So it needs to go inside home, Mr. P, PyClient, and it's right now located inside home, Mr. P, PyClient. Let's make sure, here we go, it's here. So right now, let's edit this file. So sudo nano PyClient. And inside here, we need to write a couple of commands. I'm just gonna copy and paste everything what I prepared earlier. So copy that and drop that in. So what this is gonna do is gonna cd into your home folder, then PVE-VDIClient. This is the location where we clone the Git repository. And while it's true, just initiate this program and basically just run this program. So while it's true, run it. So it runs the program, done, and then goes back, true, okay, run, done, and then it's basically an infinite loop. And that's basically stops the user of your Thinclient to access anything else except that VDI client screen. So user bin python 3 space and then all this. So Control X to close. Oh, I just basically killed it. Hold on. So Control X to close, Y to write, Enter to confirm. And now let's quickly check this. So right now, as you can see, the script is here. So if everything's done correctly, I just reboot the system, which will reboot the Raspberry Pi, and hopefully I will see nothing else but just the VDI client loading or login screen. So I'm just gonna wait for Raspberry Pi to start and I'll see what's gonna happen. So fingers crossed. So my Raspberry Pi restarted. As you can see, I can't see nothing else except this VDI screen. So if I go back here and type Mr. P and then a password, press enter, and I do have a Pop! OS connection. So I'm just connect this, and again, the VDI client sends the signal to my Proxmox server, initiates the VM, and I'm gonna log in into a Pop! OS. And inside the Proxmox, you can add user as a permission to access VM to multiple VMs. So one user can access Pop! OS and Windows, other user can access only Pop! OS, another user can access only Windows, and etc, etc. And if I punch that in, so it's loading into a Pop! OS. Once I've done everything what I need to do with Pop! OS, let's say I go back in the terminal, say sudo shut down now. VM is shutting down. I'm back to here. I click logout, and now another user can jump onto this Pi Thinclient and connect to their user. Let's say, I don't know, let's say Mike, and it's going to connect. They might get to a totally different VM access to whatever they need to do in that VM. So that's it. This is how you set up the VDI client on the Raspberry Pi to access your VMs inside the Proxmox. And I did everything on my basically Pixie boot Raspberry Pi. So I can take this Raspberry Pi, actually I can disconnect right now all this. Let's quickly do that. So shut down now, sudo. So here you go, this is a Raspberry Pi that I was using to get everything working. So just Raspberry Pi with PoE hat. So right now this can be powered by a PoE, or just connect this to any display, keyboard and a mouse, and it can access any VM I give access to that user. So it's super simple to set up and it's easy to use. A couple ideas I had while I was preparing for this video. What if, for example, I can pixie boot, let's say, from my Proxmox, but then VDI client remote into RetroPie, for example, or Mac OS, a virtual machine, as I do have a Mac OS, something besides just a standard Linux desktop or Windows desktop. So I will keep tinkering around. If I'll find something very funky or very strange and it's like very wow kind of thing, just make sure you subscribe to my channel, follow my community posts. I post it there, not quite regularly, but I post there everything that I found that something just becomes like a, oh my god, this, I don't believe it's actually working. Anyway, enough yapping. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.